She stood there, frozen. The silence in the hearing room was loud. Meeting's face had turned pale, her hands clenched tightly under the table. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett had just finished speaking, and what she said left even the chairman stunned. This was not supposed to happen. Not like this. If you want to hear what happened next, subscribe now. Because this story will take you deep into a moment that changed everything inside those walls. Just 1 hour earlier, everything looked like routine business. Another congressional hearing, another fiery debate. MTG walked in with confidence, holding her notes, ready to deliver what she believed was her strongest argument yet. The room was full, the cameras were rolling, and the mood was tense but controlled. It was until Jasmine walked in, wearing calm on her face but thunder in her voice. From the start, there was electricity between them. MTG tried to take control of the discussion, pushing her voice above others, waving papers and calling out claims she believed would corner the Democrats. She targeted Jasmine directly, throwing in remarks that felt personal, sharp, and clearly meant to provoke a reaction. But Jasmine stayed silent at first, watching, measuring, waiting. Then something shifted. Jasmine picked up her microphone slowly. Her voice was calm, her eyes locked on MTG. What followed next was not yelling or shouting, it was precision. Jasmine began to break down every point MTG had made. But she did not stop there. She started revealing the hidden facts, the contradictions, the private texts that were never meant to go public, each one pulled from official records and statements. MTG herself had signed. MTG tried to interrupt. She raised her voice. She called for order. But no one stopped Jasmine. The room watched in total silence. One senator leaned back in his chair, whispering something no one heard. Another covered his mouth, trying to hide a grin. And at the center of it all, Jasmine stood like she had waited her entire life for this moment. By the time Jasmine reached her last point, MTG was no longer looking at her. She was staring at the desk in front of her, eyes fixed on the corner, face frozen like a statue. Her mouth moved slightly, but no words came out. Then Jasmine dropped the final blow, a quote from a speech MTG had given just months earlier, now flipped against her with evidence that proved the complete opposite. It was not just a political win, it was something deeper. Like truth cutting through a lie that had lived too long, MTG pushed back her chair without a word. She stood up, grabbed her folder, and walked straight out of the room. The cameras followed her until the doors closed behind her. No one said a word. But everyone knew they had just seen something historic. Outside the hearing room, the air was thick. Porters tried to catch up, but MTG kept walking. Her pace was quick, almost like she was trying to outrun what had just happened. Her staff followed closely behind, whispering into phones, avoiding eye contact with the cameras now swarming the hall. No one had answers, not yet. Inside, the energy was still heavy. Jasmine remained seated, her face calm, but her hands slightly shaking under the desk. It was not victory she felt. It was the weight of the moment. She had not planned to go that far. But when MTG crossed a certain line, something inside her refused to stay silent. The chairman cleared his throat, trying to bring the room back to order. But the silence stretched longer than expected. No one wanted to be the first to speak. They all knew they had just witnessed a moment that would echo far beyond that building. Meanwhile, just down the hall, word had already reached the West Wing. Trump was watching from his private room. At first, he had been pleased. He believed MTG would dominate the discussion, like always. But as the feed continued, his expression changed. He leaned forward in his chair, staring at the screen. When MTG stood up and walked out, he turned sharply toward his assistant. "What just happened?" he asked. No one had an answer for that either. Back in the hallway, MTG stopped near a side door away from the crowd. Her breathing was heavy. Leaned against the wall and finally looked up at her chief of staff. She had that all planned, did she not? MTG asked, her voice barely holding together. "I do not think so," the staffer replied. It felt real. MTG stayed quiet. Something about that answer shook her more than the speech itself. At the same time, Social media had started to react, but not in the usual explosive way. This was different. People were not just sharing clips. They were asking questions. Real ones. What led to that moment? What evidence did Jasmine actually have? Why did MTG not respond? Why did she walk out? And deeper questions started forming. Ones about honesty, about truth and power, and about what the public had never been told. Inside her office, Jasmine sat alone. The door was closed, her hands finally still. She looked at the stack of papers. In front of her, the same ones she had used to deliver that quiet takedown. On top was a photo, MTG smiling from a rally 2 years ago.
Yes.
Jasmine picked it up and stared at it. She was not proud. She was not angry. She just felt tired. She knew this was not over, because the last page of her folder had one more name. A name that no one had heard yet, but one that connected everything. She placed her hand on the page, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Next time it will be him." By evening, the entire Capitol felt different. People walked through the corridors with quiet voices, exchanging looks instead of words. The tension had sunk into the walls. Everyone knew that something had cracked open, but no one was ready to admit it out loud. Jasmine's folder was no longer just a stack of papers. It had become a storm waiting to unfold. In her private office, Jasmine stood by the window. The lights of the city blinked back at her like distant warning signs. She held the final page. Of that folder in her hand, the one with the name she had not spoken in public yet. She had kept it hidden for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Today was never supposed to be that moment. But something inside her told her that time was now chasing her, not the other way around. The name on the page was bold, connected, untouched, and dangerous. Meanwhile, in a different wing of the Capitol, MTG sat in a private meeting with 2 senior advisors. Her phone was on the table, buzzing every few seconds, but she ignored it. The advisors were trying to explain how they could spin the story, redirect attention, maybe even call for a procedural review of Jasmine's actions. MTG raised her hand and stopped them. Her eyes were locked on the floor. "She had another name," she said quietly. The advisors paused. One of them asked, "What do you mean?" She was holding back. MTG replied, "She stopped because she wanted me to know she could have gone further." The room went silent again. Trump was already on the phone demanding answers. He did not like silence. He wanted to know how things had flipped so quickly, why no one warned him, and most of all, who gave Jasmine that information. Back at Jasmine's office, a soft knock broke her silence. It was her aide. "There is someone here to see you," the aide said. "He says you know him." Jasmine turned. "Did he give a name?" The aide nodded. "It is Robert." Her chest tightened. That name was not on the page, but it was connected. Deeply, Robert was not just a staffer. He used to work in the inner circle, close to MTG, before a quiet exit 2 years ago. No explanation, no press. He had disappeared into a quiet federal job, but Jasmine had not forgotten. She nodded and said, "Send him in." When Robert entered, he looked older, like the weight of unspoken things had added years to his face. He sat down without waiting. For permission, his hands folded. "I saw what happened," he said, "and I know what you are holding." Jasmine watched him carefully. "I am here because there is something worse," he continued. "And if you do not bring it out soon, someone else will, but in the wrong way." Jasmine's fingers tightened around the paper, her voice calm but cold. "Then you had better start talking." Robert leaned forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes showed the panic he was trying to hide. "There was a file," he said. "Back when I worked with MTG, it was buried, hidden under personal memos and unrelated correspondence. No one was supposed to see it. I made a copy before I left." "Yes." Jasmine did not blink. She kept her gaze fixed on him, her heart beat loud in her ears. "What was in it?" she asked. Robert paused. Then he pulled out a small drive from his coat pocket and placed it on her desk. Names, meetings, private funding, backdoor deals. But that is not the worst part. Jasmine felt a chill move through the room. "The worst part," he continued, is that some of it was approved by signatures that were not supposed to be there, people who claim they had no idea. Jasmine looked at the drive, but did not reach for it. If this is real, you are risking everything by coming here. I already lost everything, Robert said. This is the only thing I have left to make it right. It's far across the Capitol. MTG sat alone now. The advisors were gone. Her phone screen was glowing with messages from Trump's team. She ignored them. Her mind was spinning around one single thought, the name Jasmine had not said. She remembered that file, barely. It was never supposed to surface. She had signed something once without reading it carefully. She had trusted the people who gave it to her. She was realizing that trust might have been a mistake. She stood up and walked to the window, watching the city drown in golden evening light. For the first time in a long while, she felt unsure. Not about her politics, not about her words, but about the silence that might be closing in on her. In Jasmine's office, she finally picked up the drive. Her hand was shaking. "What happens if I open this, and it is everything you say?" she asked. Robert's answer came fast. "Then you are going to need more than just words. You are going to need protection." Jasmine stared at him. "You think they will come after me?" "I do not think," he said. "I know." At that moment, a soft buzz came from her phone. It was a text from an unknown number. "You are in, over your head. Back off. This is your only warning." Jasmine slowly placed the phone down. Her heart was racing now, not just from fear, but from something else. Confirmation. Someone out there knew she had touched the truth, and they were watching. She turned. "Back to Robert. If what you gave me is true, then you stay close. Because the next time they knock, it will not be quiet." Robert gave a single nod. "I am not going anywhere." Jasmine opened the drawer, placed the drive inside, and locked. The fight had only just begun. The night passed with no sleep. Jasmine sat at her desk long after Robert had left, her mind caught between fear and duty. The drive stayed locked in her drawer, but its presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. She knew what the message meant. She had crossed a line, and someone on the other side was already watching her steps. By morning, the tone in Washington had shifted. News stations were careful with their words. They mentioned a tense moment in the hearing, a sharp exchange between members of Congress, but none of them captured the weight of what had really happened. The truth was too large to put into headlines. Inside the White House, Trump had gathered his closest circle. His face was tight, jaw clenched. A large screen showed paused footage of Jasmine mid-speech. His advisors stood silent, waiting for him to speak. She should not have had that information. Trump finally said. One advisor stepped forward. "We believe it came from someone who used to be in MTG's office. We are still trying to confirm." Trump narrowed his eyes. "Then find out who. I want to know every name that touched that file." At that very moment, MTG was sitting alone in her private home office. She had not spoken publicly since the hearing. She had not posted anything. Her silence was louder than anything she could have tweeted. A single photograph sat on her desk, the final page from Jasmine's folder, printed and delivered to her by a staffer late the previous night. It was the same page Jasmine had not read aloud. The name printed on it sent chills through her, because it was not just a name. It was a threat to everything she had worked to build, to her alliances, to her position, even to her safety. Her fingers ran over the edge of the paper. As her thoughts spiraled, there was no denying it now. Jasmine had something real, and MTG had no idea how far she was willing to take it. Back in her office, Jasmine called a contact she had trusted for years, a retired federal investigator who now ran quiet audits behind the scenes. His voice came in calm over the line. "Ran the data from the drive," he said. "It is authentic. Every signature, every timestamp, every account connected to those payments. It is real." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment. "Is it enough?" There was a pause. "It is more than enough," he replied. "But if you are going to take this public, you need to be ready for what happens after. This is not just a scandal. This is a break in the wall." She opened her eyes and whispered, then maybe it is time to break it all the way. Outside her office, Robert stood guard near the hallway, phone in hand. Duh. He had just received a message, an encrypted email. That showed someone else was watching too, and they were not going to stay silent. Jasmine walked into the Capitol the next morning with no folder, no papers, just a quiet fire in her eyes. She had made her decision. The time for holding back was over. She had seen what was on the drive. She had checked it twice. The evidence was not just strong, it was explosive. And if she stayed silent now, she would become part of the very silence she had spent her life fighting against. As she passed through the metal detectors, her phone buzzed. It was a short message from Robert. They know it is coming. Be careful. She typed back only 2 words. Too late. Upstairs, MTG was already in the chamber. She looked different today. No fire in her eyes, no sharp words on her tongue. She sat quietly, flipping through a binder that she had not really read. Her mind was far away. Her phone was on silent, face down on the table. A staffer leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Her eyes slowly turned toward the door. Jasmine had arrived. Within minutes, the hearing began again. It was supposed to cover a completely different topic, but everyone in the room knew why they were really there. The last session had not ended. It had only paused. Jasmine asked to speak. The chairman looked uneasy but nodded. She stood, microphone in hand, and scanned the room. Every face was watching her, some with fear, some with hope. I believe this committee deserves clarity, she said. There are questions that need answers, and there is evidence that needs light. From the front row, MTG froze. She did not look up. Jasmine reached into her jacket and pulled out a printed report. This file includes financial records, private communications, and signed approvals, connected to programs that were kept hidden from public view. These actions were not just unethical, they were illegal. The room shifted. Chairs moved. Pens dropped. Tension cracked the air open. I've already sent copies of this report to federal investigators, Jasmine continued. But I believe the people deserve to hear the truth here, not behind closed doors, not buried under legal language, but in the open. A Republican representative stood up quickly. This is out of order, he barked. Jasmine looked straight. At him, no, this is accountability. Suddenly, MTG stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. You think you have one, do you? She said, her voice rising. You think you were the first person to walk in here with a file and try to burn everything down? I do not want to burn anything, Jasmine replied. I want to clean what is already rotted. The room erupted into voices. The chairman banged his gavel, calling for order. But order was already gone, because outside the chamber, news had already leaked. The files had been published. The signatures were live, and the people were watching in real time. Jasmine looked at MTG one last time and said, now they know. By the time Jasmine stepped out of the chamber, the world outside had changed. The hallway was lined with flashing cameras, reporters shouting questions, lights burning hot against her face. She did not stop. She walked straight ahead, eyes focused, heart steady. The truth was out now. There was no going back. Robert stood waiting at the end of the corridor. He gave her a small nod. It is spreading fast, he said. They are calling it one of the biggest leaks in congressional history. Jasmine nodded. Then they are finally paying attention. Across town, MTG sat in her car, staring blankly out the window. Her driver had not said a word. The silence between them was thick. She held her phone in her hand, the news headlines rolling across, the screen like waves crashing down on everything she had built. She scrolled without blinking. Each article repeated the same phrases: secret deals, forged signatures, hidden approvals, federal review. Her name was everywhere. But what struck her most was not the headlines. It was the public reaction. Some were defending her. Others were furious. But the part that left her shaken was the number of people who were not surprised. People who said, we knew something was wrong. People who said, this was never about politics. This was about truth. Oh. She finally spoke. Pull over, she said. The driver obeyed. MTG stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the Capitol in the distance. For the first time in her career, she felt something she never allowed herself to feel: regret. Not for what she had said in the past, but for what she had allowed, for what she had signed without asking, the silence she had traded for power. Meanwhile, in a small studio across the city, Trump's media team was in crisis mode. His communications director slammed the door behind him, eyes wild. "She went too far," he said. "This is going to open doors we cannot shut." Trump stared at the screen. Jasmine's speech was playing on loop. "She is not the problem," he said softly. "She is just the first." Back in Jasmine's office, the emails were pouring in. Messages from whistleblowers. People who had stayed silent for years. Staffers, researchers, even former aides from the highest levels of office. They were ready now. Jasmine sat quietly, reading one message after another, her hands still, her face unreadable. Robert broke the silence. "You started something." She looked up. "No, I answered something that was already screaming." Outside, the sky had turned gray, but there was no storm. Not yet. One final envelope sat on her desk. No return address. No markings. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper with 2 words: "Next target." And beneath those words, a name she never expected to see. She leaned back in her chair, stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "It is bigger than I thought." Fade to black. But the story was far from over.